Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. Just across the street from the Capitol in Tallahassee is the Leon County Courthouse. And for 2 days last week, a grand jury in that building heard testimony in a case that could prove to be one of the biggest political scandals in the state's history. A scandal that may well define Ron DeSantis' tenure as governor. A scandal that appears to have already derailed the political ambitions of his wife, First Lady Casey DeSantis. And a scandal that may still topple one of DeSantis' closest allies, Florida Attorney General James Uthmeier. I'm talking, of course, about the DeSantis administration's decision last year to secretly divert $10 million of taxpayer money from a Medicaid settlement into the Hope Florida Foundation. Money that was then quietly transferred to two other groups before eventually ending up in the bank account of a political action committee DeSantis and the current Attorney General controlled. The Republican lawmaker who helped uncover the $10 million diversion has already called what happened money laundering and wire fraud, claims DeSantis and Uthmeier deny. But what began as a series of committee hearings in the Florida House at the start of the year to determine what happened to the $10 million soon grew into a formal criminal investigation by the Leon County State Attorney in April. And that in turn has now blossomed into a full-blown grand jury probe. Leon County State Attorney Jack Campbell has refused to comment on the proceedings. Luckily for us, the two reporters who have been working this story tirelessly, the Miami Herald's Alexandra Glorioso and Tampa Bay Times' Lawrence Mower, staked out the courthouse last week.
Yeah, we've seen three people go into the grand jury. One of them was Representative Alexandra. He's a Republican lawmaker who's been investigating the whole Hope Florida Foundation saga. And he confirmed that he spent about 2 hours with the grand jury. We saw Joshua Hay, who until recently was the head of the Hope Florida Foundation, the board at least. He would not talk to us, but we saw him leaving the courthouse on Wednesday. And also Amy Ronshausen. Amy leads an organization called Save Our Society from Drugs. And the Hope Florida Foundation gave this organization $5 million of the $10 million that came from the Centene Medicaid settlement. And she wouldn't talk to us either, but we saw her going in and out with a lawyer.
And Alexandra, I think just for the public to understand, reporters, we understand this, grand jury proceedings themselves are secret, but that doesn't mean that you can't be outside the grand jury room where they're meeting and see who comes and goes. This is something that reporters have done for years in both state courts and federal courts. And so this is not uncommon, nor is it improper for instance, Representative Andrade to acknowledge that he appeared before the grand jury. Witnesses are not sworn to secrecy, only the grand jurors themselves are, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Yeah, and to clarify, Representative Andrade wouldn't tell us the substance of his testimony. He only confirmed that he was there to testify. And we didn't see people going in and out of the literal courtroom, which is why we were staking out the courthouse, trying to catch them as they were entering. It seemed as though the state prosecutors went to great lengths to keep them from public eye as much as possible.
So when you say you've seen three individuals come in and out of the courthouse, it could actually be more, that they were able to get in through back doors, side doors, and other ways to try to get in and out of the building. That wouldn't be unusual, for instance.
We're fairly certain there were several more people who testified over those 2 days, but correct, these were the three people that we physically witnessed.
In a public space, in a public setting.
Yeah. Again, it's perfectly fine to look to see who comes in and out of a public courthouse. Now, the prosecutor for Leon County is Jack Campbell. He's a Democrat, but he's said nothing about this so far. Is that correct? He's not released any information as to whether or not there even is a grand jury. He's only acknowledged that they are conducting an investigation with regard to Hope Florida. Is that accurate?
That's right. We saw Prosecutor Campbell walk out of the courtroom and he gave a no comment. He didn't deny that what they were doing there. And there was a sign outside of the room stating that there was a grand jury in session. But he has not acknowledged the substance of the grand jury's probe.
And I think it's fair to say grand juries have many options in front of them. Grand juries can be used for many different things. It doesn't necessarily mean that just because there's a grand jury been impaneled that it will result in criminal charges. They have a wide range of things. They could just simply be using a grand jury to gather information. Lawrence, talk to me a little bit about what a grand jury's role is in cases like this. Just generally speaking, what are the range of possibilities they could be involved with right now?
Well, this is a proceeding that is led by a prosecutor, okay? So these are, grand juries can be easily manipulated by a prosecutor because there's no defense being heard of a potential subject of the investigation. But a grand jury can choose to indict someone. They can choose not to indict someone. Or they could, we've seen statewide grand juries, for example, issue reports on stuff. That's also something they can do. That's probably, it's a very unusual thing, but, we've seen numerous statewide grand juries issue reports about election fraud, and there's been at least 2 on election fraud and on other, major issues. But basically their job there is to decide to indict someone or not to indict someone. And they're kind of relying on the witness testimony they hear, and the guidance from the prosecutor. I mean, but they do have quite a bit more power than a normal jury. They can ask questions. They can issue subpoenas as well. I mean, they can do all kinds of things beyond what a normal jury can do.
All right, Alexandra, let me put you in the role of a grand juror. What would you, if you had grand jury powers, and I've often wished I had grand jury powers in some of these cases, what would be some of the questions you think they should be asking, they might be asking, the information they might be gathering? What do you think the roadmap is for them?
Well, central to their, assuming they are looking into the $10 million flow of money from a Medicaid settlement to a political committee, every step of that financial transaction can be broken down into other financial transactions. And so the most important thing to gather in my mind would be the wires, the financial wires, the bank statements, any underlying documents, including emails, text messages, any kind of communication related to those financial transactions, because that would definitively show whether that money did originate from a Medicaid settlement and eventually make its way into the political committee.
So what you're talking about, and Lawrence, I'll ask you to jump in here, is basically there's 2 ways to look at this. First is, let's prove the fact that money traveled from Centene through the state to the foundation, and then from the foundation to these political committees that were lower on the rung. So part of it is just piecing the actual financial transactions, the wire transfers, the request to move money, all of those things. And then the second is the reasoning and rationale behind those transactions, and those would have to be filled in by the individuals who authorized the transactions. Why were you transferring this money? And that gets us back to the question of who they've called, and having the head of the foundation there would explain, because he could potentially explain why the foundation made the decision to move money from their account once it came in to other accounts. Am I saying it accurately?
Yeah, absolutely. And, he was the one who had the ability to wire money. He had access to the account. Joshua Hay, we're talking about. Amy Ronshausen was the recipient of some of that money. Now, what does she know? What was she told? The day after she gets the money, she starts transferring it to secure Florida, or to keep Florida clean, which is the political committee controlled by James Uthmeyer. What was she told? She has said that James Uthmeyer did not tell her where to send the money, but how did she decide to send it there? Was she in contact with someone else? We know that the lawyer for the foundation, Jeff Aaron, who is very close politically to DeSantis and James Uthmeyer, was speaking with her, was communicating with her, texting with her. We know James Uthmeyer was also texting with her, around the same time. They had a phone call together. There's a lot of records here. Other questions I would have: who came up with this idea? Who directed this? Who came up with the idea to transfer $10 million and route it this way? Did anyone come up with it? Was it something that was piecemeal? Does it developed along the way? Probably doesn't look that way, but maybe there's an explanation.
Well,
the
you
other
could even
obvious
take it.
question
You
is-
could you could even take it a step earlier. Whose idea was it to take $10 million that Centene theoretically owed the state for overbilling on Medicaid, and give 10 million of that to the foundation to begin with? Because I think your reporting and the general testimony that has come out is that this wasn't Centene's idea. Like, Centene didn't on their own say, you know what, we'd like to throw a sweetener of $10 million and send it to the First Lady of Florida's favorite idea. This came from somewhere inside the Capitol for this $10 million. And that would be the question too, is whose idea was it? So will we see potentially Centene executives? Alexandra, do you think we might see some Centene executives appearing before the grand jury?
It's certainly possible. I mean, we've reported that Centene tried to distance itself from the ultimate Medicaid settlement, which was done in a rushed format last September, just weeks before Floridians started to vote in the election, after the agreement had been dormant for years, since 2021. So it was in September that the diversion of $10 million from the $67 million Medicaid settlement was inserted into that agreement. And Centene's lawyers tried to distance themselves from it, as did the Attorney General's office. And so we know that lawyers in the State Agency for Healthcare Administration were involved with this. We know that, the Department of Children and Families was involved with this. But were these people acting on their own, or were they taking direction from their boss, who is ultimately the governor of Florida?
What are the potential crimes that they could be examining in a case like this, since it does involve a criminal grand jury?
Well, in May, this wasn't related to a state investigation, but in May, we interviewed four former federal prosecutors who told us about 8 different potential crimes, many of which stemmed from the fact that this money originated from a Medicaid settlement. And so if this was Medicaid money, it is owed to state and federal taxpayers. And if it was moved through the Hope Florida Foundation, the prosecutors told us that could be a money laundering crime under federal law, but there's also a money laundering state law. So that could potentially mirror what we had been reporting at the federal level. There are a lot of state statutes that mirror federal law. Another law that could be at stake is official misconduct, or, use of fraudulent funds.
Yeah, I mean, the House Republican lawmaker who's been investigating this has accused them of wire fraud and money laundering. I mean, there's when you look at the requirements for wire fraud, it's like electronic communications and electronic transfers and stuff. Those records are already exist. We have copies of all that stuff. We know where the money went. We know that there are text messages relating to where the money went. And so there's, these kind of charges do exist on the state level, and they could be, potentially used here to look into this.
This is obviously something we will continue to follow. When we come back, we speak to State Senator Lori Berman about property taxes and homeowners insurance. Stay with us.